now, but most importantly, the host of 83 Weeks and also WWE Hall of Famer, the one and only Eric Bischoff. And I looked at your Twitter a couple hours ago, Eric, and pinned on your top post is, I can't believe it either. You're in the WWE Hall of Fame. Is it one of those things that you don't know when that'll actually hit?
Oh, I think it hit. I think the overwhelming, response and all of the outpouring of support and everything that hit me on social media, that was pretty cool. And that was pretty overwhelming, but it's still, I talked about a little bit in my induction ceremony. It feels weird for me to be in the same neighborhood as some of the people that I grew up at, looking up to and admiring and having fun as a fan watching, from the time I was a little kid. And then eventually, getting into the industry and people that I learned from, like Vergania, for example. And, to be kind of in their same club, so to speak, I'm not sure I'll ever feel completely at home there.
I was watching the video when Corey Graves announced it on the After the Bell podcast, and it looked like you were just about to cry. Like, it was like you were about to weep. And I'm like, man, you can tell, even for everything you've done in the wrestling business for over 30 plus years now, even something as the WWE Hall of Fame, you can tell it really got to you. Why did it get to you so much? They were to the point where you wanted to cry.
I don't know. I've thought about that a little bit myself, because, look, for the last 10 or 15 years, every time WrestleMania rolls around, I'm asked frequently in interviews or in social media, are you going into the Hall of Fame this year? So it's not like I haven't thought about it. I've had to think about it to answer questions. The thoughts cross my mind, but I guess when the reality of it, and that's the reality of it is what hit me when I was speaking to Corey and Vic Joseph. And it was the reality that I hadn't experienced before. It went from being an idea in my head or an idea in somebody else's head and me kind of casually thinking, well, I wonder what that would be like, to, wow, it's actually happening. And when that, wow, it's actually happening hit me, that's when, I did get a little emotional. And it could have got worse, man. I cried Disney movies. So it's, but it was in the moment of it becoming a reality instead of just an idea or a thought.
Well, Eric, you went there, so I'm going to go there now then. I got two little ones. I got a 4 and almost a 2-year-old, and my 4-year-old cries in some Disney movies already. So what's the Disney movie you've cried at, Eric?
Probably every one of them, especially, Disney sports movies.
Okay.
Those are always a gusher for me. I don't know why. Lion King slayed me. So it doesn't take much, man. If it involves young kids or animals or an underdog, I'm all in.
I hear it. Do you view yourself as an underdog? And I know that's a weird question to say for everything you've done in the business, but you came from selling. You were a salesman. I remember I read your book, and you worked here in Chicago for a little bit with your wife. You were doing that, and then you got to Minneapolis, and then you just lucked into, you were selling, you pitched Vern, and you guys had a meeting, and look, and you're in the AWA, and you're behind the stick on ESPN. And do you feel like, in a way, you are the epitome of an underdog story?
I've never thought of myself as an underdog. Actually, probably deep down inside the opposite. I've always felt like I could do anything I want to do. If I'm interested enough in it, if it creates a passion in me and it challenges me the right way, I'm pretty sure I can accomplish anything I want to accomplish. So I guess I've never really identified with an underdog kind of person or position. I am unlikely, because of my nature, because I've always been an entrepreneur, things just, from the outside looking in, and even from the inside looking out, sometimes it's just like, wow, why all these things just come at me? Well, they don't come at me. I'm involved in enough things and try enough projects and get involved with enough opportunities that, they kind of grow on their own. They take on a life of their own. Sometimes they're very successful, sometimes they're not, but they still keep coming. I'm producing a movie for Netflix. I never thought of myself as, for a second, as a guy who was even, contemplating, trying to get into the movie business. Boom, here it is,
Right.
I've got a couple other big projects that are coming down the pipeline here pretty quick. And there's similar types of projects that I never thought I'd do that, but here I am, and I think it's just, having the enthusiasm to learn about new ideas, new projects, new opportunities, and just always being passionate to learn and grow. And then those opportunities come at you. So I've never really thought of myself as an underdog, just, a guy that happens to get lucky every once in a while. That's probably the best way to say it.
I always try to tell people that, the last time we had talked, you were about to come to Chicago to do the podcast with Tony. You and Tony were going to do something together, and you had talked about the Hall of Fame. I remember because you said, you always get asked, and me and you had talked about it briefly, and you were like, I don't try to think about it, and I won't think about it until they make the call. So when you get the call and then you get told, hey, this is going to happen, and you get told on air, is it something like you still do you pinch yourself at all? Or is it like, wow, it's actually here. It's actually going to happen. Or did you if it never happened, you would have been content and more than okay with that too?
It's both, a little bit of both. I don't have to pinch myself. I mean, it's real to me now, especially now. The reality of it has set in. So it's not like I'm afraid I'm going to wake up and it was all a rib, but again, part of my nature is to not think too much about things I have no control over.
Yeah.
And again, unless it's a goal I have or something that I've decided to set my sights on, that's different. But for something like the Hall of Fame, it really, all the way up until this year, it was, hey, if it happens, I'll be great. And if it doesn't happen, I'll be tuning in to watch it. I didn't expect it. I didn't feel like it was owed to me. I didn't feel like I deserved it. That's one of the things and I know what people mean, when they're just trying to be nice and being supportive. Yeah. But every time I'd get a hit on social media where somebody would say I deserved it, I'd always go, I don't think anybody deserves it. I think, people are privileged and I'm obviously honored to be involved. But, the idea of people deserving it, I think it's a little foreign to me. And because I didn't feel like I deserved it, I had no expectations either. And the great thing about not having expectations about things you have no control over is you're not going to be disappointed. Either way, it's great. If you win, you win. If you lose, you're still going to win anyway, because you have a good attitude about it. And that's kind of the way I went into the Hall of Fame thing for the last decade or so.
You were talking about the producing thing earlier for Netflix, and the last time we had chatted, it was out there, but it wasn't officially announced. You said you couldn't really reveal nothing publicly about the producing the movie, the biopic of Hulk. And how is the process of that going on right now? I know Chris was starting to get in shape and everything like that. I don't think you could ever look like Hulk, but I think he's going to try as best as he can. But how is that process going right now?
It's in, and there's still a lot of things I can't talk about because until Netflix makes an official announcement, I can talk about things that have already been out there in the media, but I can't go much beyond that. I think I can say safely in a general sense, it's a long process. And I think COVID, obviously, I know COVID has had a dramatic impact on the timeline and the pacing of everything. Even right now, there are some movies that you can shoot if it's a closed set or you're using a lot of, computer generated graphics and things like that in images. You can still, if it's a heavily post-produced movie, you can still do it. But, we're still kind of waiting, and everybody's schedules, the actors involved and the director and everybody, all the key people that are involved, they're still, because they all have 3-4 other projects, kind of in the same position. So it's just a matter of waiting till the COVID thing settles in a little bit and, production scales up and people are comfortable producing again. And then it's just a matter of seeing where the ducks fall with regard to scheduling.
Like you said, COVID's really affected a lot of things, just in wrestling, MMA, boxing, and just sports in general. And how has COVID affected you?
Personally, not at all. I live in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and I decided to move to the middle of nowhere, Wyoming back in 1998 with my wife and my kids, or build a house here. We didn't move here full time then, but we wanted to live here. And the reason for that is because I kind of dig social distancing.
There ain't nothing wrong with that.
So when all of a sudden social distancing became an issue, it was like, cool. I can still look out my window and see Yellowstone National Park.
That ain't a bad view.
I don't have a lot of people around me anyway. Now it was, and I live in a small town. There's only about 8,500 people in the city that I live in. I live outside of the city. And of course, in the beginning, there was concern and nobody was sure about anything. And the news every day was changing and nobody was really sure what was going to happen or how long it was going to be. But, where I live, here, because it's a smaller town, it's a pretty tight knit community and everybody just generally kind of watches out for each other anyway.
Yeah.
So when it came to going into Walmart or into the local, Albertsons grocery store or anywhere in public, people wore masks, but nobody got like militant about it and, wearing them or not wearing them. Everybody just kind of got along, did the right thing, wore their masks. And, we had cases of COVID here, just like everybody else did, but it was, not as significant here, I think, on a per capita basis as it was around the country. And part of it is because everybody's spread out so much anyway.
You do the podcast from home, so it's really not going to affect you in that way. But did it? Well, I know you were doing, you and Conrad were going on the road. You were doing different shows for the podcast and everything like that. You would do some conventions here and there as well. Did you miss that at all? Did it kind of feel like, man, now I can just kind of chill at home. I don't really have to go anywhere. I can just chill out, look at Yellowstone National Park and do a podcast. It's not a bad deal.
No, it's not a bad deal. But it's a great deal, by the way. I don't want to make it sound like it's not a big deal.
Absolutely.
It's an awesome deal, to be honest. There's nothing like doing a podcast in your underwear, looking out the window up at Yellowstone National Park and not having to leave your house. I'm not going to lie. You know what I did miss? I do miss, when we were touring 83 weeks, and we've got one coming up in June, early June, that was just announced today at Jimmy's Famous Seafood. And we're obviously looking forward to that because we're a big supporter of Jimmy's and all the great things that they do there. I do miss that kind of, face-to-face interaction. When Conrad and I do a 83 weeks live podcast, it's more like stand-up comedy than it is like a podcast. And the interaction with the audience and the fun that we have, you can't do that sitting in your underwear in your office at home alone in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. You don't get that same rush. I do miss that, but I'm not going to lie. I don't miss the travel. Travel has become such a challenge anymore that if I never have to get on a plane and fly anywhere again, I'm not going to be sad about it. It'll be okay with me. I'll still do it, but I've kind of enjoyed not traveling as much. I miss not being somewhere.
Yeah.
But I don't miss the traveling part that's required to get there, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Are you going to go to now? The thing with Jimmy's, I know it's going to be you. Then I know the day before is Zach Ryder's podcast, and I forget who's the day after you guys. But do you go to Baltimore, or is it all virtual?
No, we're going, man. We're gonna
cool.
we're gonna party like it's 2019, I guess. No, we're going there live, and that's the fun part. That's the part where you get to have fun with the audience, and you get somebody out there that wants to kind of heckle, and everybody does it in a fun way. It's not done in a contentious way. It's just fun, and that I'm looking forward to. Plus the crab cakes at Jimmy's Famous Seafood, just like life-changing stuff there. Life-changing.
It's one of those things where you just want to keep eating them. Even when you're full, you just want to keep eating.
Yeah, I have that problem. And that's why, Jimmy's delivers, and I get, shipments delivered to my house a couple times a year, but I have to be careful because you can eat them often.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of them, and they're rich and they're good, but you get a little older, you got to kind of slow that stuff down because otherwise I'll end up looking like, Brutus the Barber Beefcake,
Oh, you had that crack up Brutus joking. I thought you guys were good now, no?
Well, we're not bad, but hey, if you're chunky, right?
I was watching a video today on Twitter, the preparation for the interview, and it was the old 1998 video when you were in Dagley Gym challenging good old Vince to a match at Slamboree, and I forgot all about. I remember what led to it and everything, but I don't remember that video. You were in the gym kicking some ass, taking people down, kicking them against the ropes, and what was your thought process at that time? I know it's a long time ago, but did you ever think he was going to show up? Because I ordered the Eric, you sold me goods there. Me and my buddies were watching Nitro. You're calling him out. We're watching Thunder. We're thinking he's going to be there. And he was, and he did all the bells and whistles, and he never showed up.
You know, I wasn't sure. You know, I had people that knew Vince because I didn't know Vince at the time. You know, I knew of Vince. I think I met him in person once for about 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So I didn't know him at all as a human being. I only knew of him through other people. And a lot of times when you hear about someone else, it's distorted or exaggerated, you know, good or bad. So I kind of, you know, I only paid attention to about 25% of what I heard. Now, some people that I was close to that I trusted, you know, said, dude, Hulk Hogan said, he'll show up.
Yeah.
And he'll fight. And he'll probably kill you, Eric. So you might want to think twice about this, you know, because Hulk knew Vince on a much more personal level than I did. And I thought, well, if he shows up and beats my ass, I'll win because that'll be some of the best television that's ever been produced. And if he doesn't show up, I'm going to make him look like he chickened out and I'm still going to win. So that's one of those win-win situations where if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But we actually made arrangements not knowing for sure if he was going to show up. We did.
Remember
I had
the locker room and everything.
Yeah, we had a separate dressing room for him, and I let security know. Doug Dillinger, I had a security. You know, he knew that if Vince and his team were to show up, that they were to be escorted into the building, shown all professional courtesy, get them to the dressing room, treat them like they were anybody else who was a guest on the show. And you know, it just didn't happen.
I always felt, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I always felt like you and him in WWE was a major missed opportunity to make a lot of money on every level.
I think he probably still feels that way, and so do I. You know? In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. But you know, that requires chemistry. You know, and that requires collaboration, and it mostly above all else, because you can't have good collaboration without great chemistry. And the chemistry just wasn't quite right. And a lot of that was my fault. You know, I went into this, you know, the last time I was there for a brief period of time as executive director, you know, I think I came in with the intention, I should say, of what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to try to accomplish, but I also knew what I wanted to try to accomplish was going to be difficult and it was going to be complicated. And I knew it was going to take me some time to really fully understand the WWE system and the chemistry within the WWE team and how that chemistry affects the system. There's a lot to learn. There's a million moving pieces when you're producing 5 hours of prime time, you know, highly rated programming each and every week. 2 of those hours out of those 5 on one of the largest, you know, terrestrial networks in the world. It's challenging, and the WWE is a challenging environment. It's a challenging culture. It's a great culture, but it's very unique. And I thought, well, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to learn. I'm going to see the opportunities. I'm going to learn the best way to present my ideas. And in my mind, I knew it was going to take me 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
I was on a shorter timeline than that, I guess. And I'm not sure had I stuck around, it would have worked, because there's just the chemistry just wasn't right. And it's not anybody's fault. It wasn't because Vince was a bad guy or because Eric was a bad guy. Yeah. It's just, you know, you meet people and sometimes you just click and sometimes you just don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's how it goes. So I chalk it up to chemistry, but I know Vince was disappointed that it didn't work out. We had a conversation about that. Yeah. And I know I was disappointed because no matter how I spin it or look at it or reflect upon it, it was a failure on my part. I didn't achieve my goal. There's no other way to look at it. And I'm disappointed in myself for that. I could have done better. You know, in hindsight, I've thought about it and I thought, okay, I probably should have gone in with guns ablazing and kind of damn the torpedoes. This is what I want to do. And just fight it out, you know, in a head-to-head kind of a way. And I think maybe challenging, you know, the system a little bit early on would have probably been a better move than just kind of sliding in the back door and evolving into that position. But hey, water under the bridge, it's all good.
You said something there I thought in the beginning I thought was interesting. So you had, and you said it again near the end, that you had some goals that you wanted to do when you were there. And what were one or two of those goals that you wanted to accomplish?
You know, and it's still something that I can't get out of my head. You know, when I watch the product, anybody's, not just WWE's, but when I watch the product as I see it today, and having a unique perspective of how the industry has changed from a presentation point of view over the last 25 years, I have had this for a long time. I had it in my head, you know, before I got the call to go back to WWE, you know, a year and a half ago. There's a formula for telling great stories. There's a formula in the movie business. There's a formula in scripted television. There's a formula in the publishing business. If you're going to write a novel or any kind of a book, hell, there's even a formula for doing stand-up comedy and infomercials. And I've often thought, well, if formulas are so important to every other form of entertainment other than sports, obviously, and even sports has its own kind of unique formula. But if there's a very distinct formula that applies to all of these other forms of entertainment, why don't I take what I've learned and what I know and the experience I have and try to create that template, try to create that formula so that rather than just shooting an angle and hoping a story works, following a kind of tested formula that gives that story at least a 50-50 chance of being successful, or a 75% chance of being successful. Because I think right now what happens is, you know, people get ideas, you sit in a room and you bounce ideas around, and, you know, someone says, hey, I like that idea. Let's flesh it out and make it work and run with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like throwing stuff up against a wall unless you have a plan or a formula. And that was my goal, was to create that template for that formula that's very unique to professional wrestling and to the professional wrestling audience, because the professional wrestling audience is different than scripted television or, you know, sitcoms or any other kind of entertainment. You know, the professional wrestling audience is a unique audience, and you have to understand that audience and what makes them unique in order to tailor that formula to them. So that was the one thing that I really was hoping to do while I was there, but never really got my feet underneath me firmly enough to try to implement it.
I'll ask you this point blank. Do you regret taking the job?
No, I don't, because a lot of good things came out of it, you know? So no, I don't regret it. I wish it would have worked out differently.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as regretting it. You know, I don't regret it at all.
You know, you talked about, you know, that's the one thing I agree with you 100% on terms of stories and trying to tell a story, see the story out, so on and so forth. Why do you think we don't get enough of that in pro wrestling in general?
It's a very good question. And in my opinion, at least, it has a fairly complex answer. But I think one of the things that's happened over especially the last 10 years, and it's become even more important and significant over the last 5, the sheer volume of content that now has to be produced requires a different way of producing it, writing it. The whole process of creating it needs to adapt to the sheer volume of content that's required by the WWE or AEW to produce. And when you're producing when you're producing the ideas, and I'm going to talk about it like widgets, right? So if you've got a bunch of people sitting in a room and their job is to create all kinds of different widgets, and they're used to producing, or they're using a formula or system that worked really well 20 years ago before you quadrupled your output of widgets, you're probably going to run into a problem. By that, I guess what I'm trying to say is the requirement for the creative process has to evolve to meet the pressure and the demands that all these hours of content put upon it.
Yeah. And
I think what's happening today, no matter where you look, we don't have to single anybody out here because it's true across the boards.
Yeah.
Ideas are being produced today really the same way they were produced 25 and 30 years ago. They have to produce more of them, but the system hasn't changed. It hasn't adapted. It hasn't gotten it, the formula hasn't kept pace with the sophistication of the audience. The wrestling audience is more sophisticated today, and by sophisticated I mean demanding. The wrestling audience is more demanding today or sophisticated than they were 10 years ago, or they were 20 years ago, or they were 30 years ago. Add to that now everybody's producing more and more content, but the ideation engine, the engine that drives ideas, hasn't changed. So it's a little bit like putting a straight line 6-cylinder engine in a Ferrari and asking yourself, why isn't this working? Well, if you're going to build a Ferrari, you have to build an engine that goes with it. And the creative engine has to adapt and evolve as quickly as the amount of content it's required to produce. And I don't think it has, in my opinion.
Me and you aren't going to insult the intelligence of the fans, because I agree. Just covering wrestling, MMA, and boxing, the fans are not even more also demanding, but to me, they're more smarter today than they were, because they're, fans would see the Attitude Era, then they go, oh yeah, that's great. And then they'd go off and do their next thing. But a lot more people are more passionate about pro wrestling to me than they were during the Attitude Era. Is that a fair assessment, or am I missing the point on that?
I don't think you're wrong completely, but I think the reason it feels like people are more passionate now is because everybody has a platform. 15 years ago, there wasn't Twitter or Facebook to the extent that there is now. There wasn't Reddit. There wasn't all of these ways and means by which wrestling fans can create communities and voice opinions that get regurgitated or republished, if you will, by other outlets that are news outlets. So I think social media and the access to it is what's driving the perception that people may be more loyal or passionate today. They've always been loyal and passionate. It's just within the last several years that everybody now has a platform and can express themselves. And they treat wrestling and what they watch on television much the same way they treat everything else. There's always haters out there, and people just love to battle back and forth. And it creates this perception that people are more engaged, and they are more engaged because they have the ability to be. But I've always said, man, long before social media came along, I've always believed that wrestling fans, I still believe it to this day, maybe even more so, wrestling fans are, other than maybe NASCAR, probably the most loyal fans in the world. They're just so loyal, and that manifests in a lot of different ways. For me, when I was doing a lot of conventions and autograph signings and things like that, I typically, have a line of people, waiting to get my autograph, and you'd see a 55 or 60-year-old guy with his, 25-year-old son with that 25-year-old son's, 14-year-old kid. And they all watch wrestling. And a 14-year-old kid who wasn't even alive when I was doing Nitro is coming up to me and having me, sign NWO merchandise from when WCW was hot. And I just said, wait a minute, you weren't even around back then. But because of the WWE network, now Peacock TV, they're still out there. And it's a generational father to son to grandson type of a thing. And that kind of creates that loyalty to the product.
My 4-year-old, because I'm constantly having to watch whether it's WWE, AEW, the UFC, Bellator, or any boxing show that's on, whether it's the Zone or ESPN or Fox. And my 4-year-old I had on was watching some stuff randomly recently, and the Finger Poke of Doom episode was on the network. So I'm watching it, and my son thinks it's cool. He's like, he sees you, he sees Hulk and everything, and he sees you're at the announce booth, and then it's like, oh, I've talked to this guy before. Like this, he's like always asking, like, oh, I talked to this guy. I'm like, oh, yeah, I talked to him. And then Kevin or Hulk in the ring, like, oh, I've talked to Kevin. I've never talked to Hulk. And he goes, then when Hulk poked Kevin, my 4-year-old's like, wait a minute. He's like, what happened? And I'm like, buddy, I don't know. And then we were talking about it too. He's like, can you ask him what about that? And I'm like, sure, why not? I'm like, I'll do it for you. Because the crowd really crapped on it. And I think the crowd wasn't too necessarily thrilled. I thought it was absolutely brilliant just because that was the last thing you were expecting to happen.
Bingo.
On that particular evening. I thought as a fan, I'm like, oh my God, it's great. But fans are totally different in that day of age and even today. And what was your mind? I know it's a long time ago, but what did you make of that moment just in general? Because to me, it was pure brilliance because you didn't see it coming. But then also it's like, oh man, we wanted to see Bill. We wanted to see Goldberg and Kevin.
Yeah, that was the nicest way anybody's ever asked me, Eric, what the hell were you thinking?
I don't believe in that I believe in some journalistic integrity. Eric, the Zone pays me decently.
That's okay. No, look, the whole idea, not the entire idea, because it's hard for me to remember all the details leading up to it. But I think generally speaking, the idea was let's tease a split. Let's get everybody going. Oh, wow, this is it. This is now they're fighting for this is going to be oh man, somebody's going to turn on somebody. And nope, we just want to keep the title in the NWO. And it was intended to piss people off. I just pissed them off in the wrong way. I didn't want them to reach for a remote.
I know you're not a man with no regrets. You're kind of, it happened. I own it. And we got, unfortunately, we have to move on. But, you look at that moment in time and it's, you guys were both neck and neck. And you've said before the beginning of the end was long before, before the end of 98 with Bill losing the title, so on and so forth. But do you feel like that was like the avalanche got bigger when you had that moment in the Georgia Dome?
No, I know from an audience's perspective, it's easy to, kind of go, hey, well, they did that finger poke thing and then things really started getting bad after that. Therefore, that had to be the reason. And I get it. But no, had we done that same thing a year earlier, wouldn't have mattered. It would have worked better.
Yeah.
But there were so many other things that were really going on behind the scenes, and some of it ended up on camera as a result, that that the Finger Poke of Doom was coincidental to the decline. It wasn't the cause of it.
I have to ask you this because this made the news. Have you watched the Jericho Austin podcast at all?
I've watched clips of it. I haven't really had time to see the whole thing. I've been a little busy since I've been traveling, and I just got home yesterday and I'm kind of playing catch up now. So I really haven't seen it, but I've seen certain clips of it throughout the show.
I know you're friends with Steve and you're friends with Chris, and just the fact that I wanted to get your thoughts on it because since you tried to get Vince to come in, and what do you think of that whole thing? You're seeing an AEW star, they're quite arguably their biggest star on WWE network programming.
I think people are making a bigger deal out of it than it really is. I was really happy to see it. I think that's the way it should be. I can't imagine it's going to have any adverse impact on WWE. In fact, if anything, I think it makes them appear to be larger in terms of, it's like when you say, hey, you need to be the bigger person here.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is true in this case. I think WWE as a entity, as a corporate entity, is a bigger thing because they're not afraid to let people come in and have a voice. They're in my opinion, Look, I was on an AEW program through 3 weeks before I got inducted to the Hall of Fame.
You were.
Didn't
That was
matter to
fantastic.
them.
That was fantastic. You came on and I'm like, wait a minute. I'm going to see you in like 3 weeks. Look at that. Not bad.
And part of that was just good communication. I let everybody know that I'm close to in WWE, that I was going to do it before I did it. Made sure that there was no issues. And mostly I wasn't asking for permission. I was basically just making sure nobody was blindsided.
Yeah.
And it's like if you're married and you want to go out with some friends after work and have a beer, you call and say, hey, honey, do you mind if I know I'm supposed to be home at 5:00 for dinner, but do you mind if I hang out for a little while and have a couple beers? And since you call and just, do it, sure, no problem. Whereas if you don't call, you just go do what you're doing, it's kind of like, well, hell with you. It creates a conflict. So for me, I think it was just good communication. And I think in the case of Chris and Steve, it was probably good communication there as well. Based on what I've heard from Chris, that was definitely the case. But I think the audience tends to make that issue a bigger issue than it was. And, people want the Monday Night Wars to come back so badly. They want that feeling of battles and wars and territories and gangs. And, you go over to you're friends with anybody backstage over there, you'll be fired. They want to believe that that's true.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's just not.
Because I talked to Tony Khan last week, and he had even said he made it simple. He's like, Chris asked, we had a conversation about it. I really didn't think about it too long. I'm like, he's like, I'm not requesting a final. I didn't request a final edit.
Well, that's good. Good
move,
like, Tony.
Right? That's what I'm thinking. So I'm like, that was actually pretty smart. And he's like, I'm friends with Chris. I'm really good friends with Chris. I'm really good friends with Steve. He's like, it's not really, Vince signed off on it. It's like, well, it wasn't. Like he said the same thing you did. People made a bigger deal out of it than they did.
And really, what does AEW have to lose?
Nothing. I think, to me, they gain out of it. And maybe this is just me because they're still building. They've only been around
year and a half,
right around that point. WWE's been around since 1963. They got a little more goodwill. They've been around longer, so on and so forth. So if it's going to help anybody, it's going to help Peacock subscriptions. So that's going to help WWE on that end. But then it's going to go help AEW because then Chris is talking about it ad nauseum on the podcast. People are going to watch. So I think everyone wins in that deal.
And that's exactly it. You took the words right out of my mouth, buddy. It's a win-win. How does anybody say no to a win-win situation? Unless you're really insecure, then I can see why you would. But if you're not insecure and you trust your talent, then you've got nothing to lose, and neither does WWE. Or, when I say you, I mean AEW's got nothing to lose. Neither does WWE. They both stand something to gain. Jeez, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Chris said something on the podcast, and I wrote it down. I want to make sure I ask you this, that when you were wanting to you found out about him, you went to the big show in Los Angeles. He's like, Eric didn't even come to the show. He's like, he said he wanted to bring me to Atlanta. He'll make sure I get in. We'll have a meeting for me to come in WCW. He didn't even come me to watch wrestling in California. I just had to say that because I laughed because I thought that was downright hilarious. He's like, why would someone want to meet with me and then don't want to see me wrestle?
I have to go back and check the accuracy of that statement, and it's one of the things that happens when, and it happens. I do it too. So I'm not being critical, but when you tell certain stories over and over and over and over again for a couple decades, those stories begin to kind of evolve.
So you don't say.
So I because I was in Los Angeles. Now, if Chris was on one event that I didn't go to, but I was going to another event that I have in my mind, maybe he's right, but maybe that story just has evolved a little bit.
You look at Chris's evolution. What do you make of the evolution of his character consistently through the years? Because you looked at him like he was a cruiserweight in WCW, went to WWE, really didn't break through there it took him a couple of years to finally find his footing. And then than just the constant evolution of his character throughout the years. What do you make of the constant evolution of Chris Jericho?
He's got an amazing drive and creative mind. You know, he's recognized that you can't live off of the same character for extended periods of time unless you're The Rock, or unless you're a Hulk Hogan, or, you know, a Ric Flair back in the day, Steve Austin. You know, Chris came up behind all of that. You know, he came up after all of that when the business began to change and it became harder and harder to be that face of the company. And let's, you know, to be honest, without making it sound like I'm being critical, you know, Chris just was never that guy that was going to be long-term the face of the company. And he was smart enough to know that. So he evolved his character when he felt he needed to. And he has a great instinct for that. So that if he's not the face of the company, if he's not at the very top, he's at the next level. He's very, very close to the top. And he'll have, you know, periods of time where he is in and out of that top position, or working with some of the top people. And that's how you keep your stock high as a performer and as a character. It's no different than I would guess, you know, actors and actresses sometimes, you know, they're looking for that role that's a completely different role than anything that they've ever done. Because number one, they want to challenge themselves, which is, I think, something that Chris is, it's very much true with Chris as well. He likes to challenge himself creatively because he's a great performer. That's how great actors and actresses become great actors and actresses. One of the reasons. But I think the other reason you change that role or you change that character when you feel you need to is because you don't want to get pigeonholed. You know, you just don't want to, because the business will, any business, music, movies, television, if you don't evolve as a character and as a performer and grow as a character and as a performer, the business will pass you by. And Chris was smart enough and creative enough and driven enough to see that and just adapted and evolved.
A few more questions, Eric, and thank you so much for the time today. It's really appreciated. And did you see this type of talent in him to where he would still be near the top of his game going right now? He's going past 30 years in the business. Did you see this thing in him that where he can do this? Or did you think, like you said, you know, he would have a shelf life and then he'd be riding off into the sunset?
No, I mean, you know, it's well documented. I tried hard to keep Chris. You know, I saw Chris as an amazing talent. You know, I saw what he did. I saw the things that he came up with. I didn't come up with a lot of that stuff. Kevin Sullivan didn't come up with a lot of that stuff that he was doing in WCW when he became as popular as he was in WCW. That was Chris. Yeah. And him, you know, kind of evolving his character even in WCW. And I tried real hard to keep him. But, you know, Chris looked around. And again, I was just thinking about this in a different way. But I was thinking about how smart Chris is just the other day, or yesterday, flying home on a plane. Partly because I was watching that podcast. I'm thinking, you know, he's smart enough to look around and go, okay, timing is really bad here. You know, just, I think, you know, Chris's quote, or at least one of them that I read out of that podcast was, I knew I didn't want to be a second match guy in WWE. So he left WWE. Dusty Rhodes used to say, man, ride that lightning bolt all the way till it hits the ground, then jump on that next lightning bolt. And that's what Chris is doing. You know, he's riding his opportunities out. He's doing as well as he possibly can as a performer and challenging himself along the way. And the minute it looks like those opportunities may not be here for me, I'm either going to change my character or I'm going to find another lightning bolt. That's a great, great characteristic for a top performer in any category. Look what he's doing in music. You know, why does a guy who's made, you know, and I don't know how much money Chris has made throughout his career, but I'd venture to say it's close to a fortune by now. Why would a guy who's made all that money, who's toured in professional wrestling with WWE, which is a grueling tour schedule, by the way, for as long as Chris had, why in the world in his spare time would he want to tour with a heavy metal band?
Good question.
I mean, because he's driven, because he wants to challenge himself, because he sees himself in a different way. And that's the same characteristic that's kind of, you know, been with him all through these different evolutions of his character. It's the same characteristic in music and in wrestling for Chris. And he's a standout guy in that respect. You know, Ric Flair didn't have to evolve his character. Hulk Hogan, although he did with the NWO character, Hulk Hogan rode that, you know, red and yellow character for a long time. And, Chris was smart enough to go, you know what, that lightning bolt's about ready to hit the dirt. So I'm going to find a new one. And if I can't see another lightning bolt to jump on, I'm going to create one. It's pretty cool.
Is that what separates a lot of the top talent in your mind from everybody else? Just knowing, like you said there, like ride that wave. When you feel like you're starting to go off the cliff, then you go find the next thing. Is that because I feel like that's what separates those top guys from other performers?
I think, yes, and that's drive and ambition, and having the creativity. Some people are great athletes and can do amazing things physically, but they may not have that gene that wakes them up at 3 o'clock in the morning with an idea in their head that they think they can make work. That's a unique characteristic for a human being to have, to constantly be thinking, sometimes even in your sleep, about ideas and ways to implement new ideas. That's, it can be a burden for some, and other people thrive off that. And I think Chris is one of those unique people that thrive from that.
Talking about thriving, the podcast is roaring, Eric. 83 weeks. You can find it on all your favorite podcasting platforms, adfreeshows.com. It feels like the podcast is bigger than it's ever been, because that's what I feel like right now. You guys are just clicking on all cylinders right now.
I know, right? And the first question I asked Conrad, I said, great, once we cover, these 83 weeks, what are we going to talk about? I think we're on 150 weeks and counting. So
that's okay.
Yeah, I am surprised, but it's really fun. And it's really interesting because if you listen to the first couple months of our podcast, it was just, I go back and listen to it now and I'm almost embarrassed because, the way I handled things and questions and just, we talked about earlier about chemistry, right? Mm-hmm. And the chemistry between Conrad and I was okay, but it wasn't great. We were trying to feel each other out. We were both looking for a way to make it work. And we stumbled around the dark room for a while, tripped over a couple chairs, almost fell through a window once or twice. But eventually we kind of found our groove. And then once we found our groove, the show started being fun. And that's what I tell people. I do podcasts all the time with people who reach out to me who are just starting podcasts, because I've got a soft spot in my heart for people who are just trying, who believe they have a way they just want to try. And if I can find time in my day or in my week, then I'll do those podcasts. And sometimes they're people that nobody's ever heard of. But part of it, the reason I do that is also to challenge myself to find chemistry with people that I don't know. Yeah. And try to and have fun doing a podcast with a person or two people sometimes who I've never talked to before. And if I can make that fun, no matter how great of a job they're doing, or in some cases not, but in either case, if I can make that fun for me, I know it's fun for their listeners. Yeah. They win and I win because it's another challenge. And I remind myself every time I sit down to do a podcast with Conrad or with anybody, it's got to be fun. I got to have fun doing it, and you have to have fun doing it. And if you and I are having fun, the rest takes care of itself.
I'm having fun because we were talking before we hit this record button. I hit this record button. And you said I feel like if we'll say 45 minutes, just depending on how things go, and you can get a vibe. I haven't got the vibe yet, so I haven't. I'm feeling pretty good.
Well, and that's what happens. People say, "Well, how much time do I have?" I say, "Okay, let's try to keep it to 45 minutes or an hour." 3 hours later, I'm going, "Oh my gosh, I got."
I promise we won't go that long. I
told my neighbors I was going to grill a turkey today. I better get to work.
You said something. I remember when we talked. Well, I think it was like around a year and a half ago when you were about to come here. We last talked, and you had said that about it took a minute to click with Conrad. Was there a particular episode where it finally clicked, or is it one of those things like it's riding a bike where you keep doing repetitions, it just finally gets together?
No, it just evolved. And it wasn't like one thing. It was like I picked up the phone and called Conrad, or Conrad didn't call me and say, "Hey, let's try and do this instead." It wasn't that. It was just trial and error. And just over a period of time, I went from, I got to do a podcast today to, oh man, I can't wait to do the podcast tomorrow. The minute I get to the point where I'm looking forward to doing it, I know we're winning, and it took a while to get there. And but it happened slowly over time. It didn't happen overnight.
You're looking at over 3 years now. And does it surprise you, the success of the podcast still? Is it, Are you just used to it? And I was like, okay, because you don't want to sound cocky, like, yeah, I know I'm the shit. I know my podcast is one of the best out there, but when did it click for you that you knew you fell into something and you just want, like you said earlier, we were talking about ride the lightning, that you're enjoying riding that lightning still?
I think it really clicked when we started doing the live shows a while back and seeing people, that listen to the show every week, showing up, and wanting to see it live and interact with us. There was a couple shows that we did, and not solo shows, although I had several solo shows that, drew really, really well before COVID, and they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I think, Bruce and I would do one together, or Bruce and I and Tony did one together. You put 2,000-3,000 people that are dropping pretty significant money that all want to come and sit, in a venue and basically party with you and call it a podcast. That's when I went, I clearly didn't see the opportunity that really does exist here. And that's when it became kind of a change in the way I looked at things.
How are you looking at it?
How am I looking at it now?
How were you looking at it then before you were like, man, this is
I just didn't think it would be that unpopular. I didn't think it would resonate as much as it does. I didn't, I joke about it the other day. I don't know if you saw this, but Conrad and I are doing a podcast, and I was, how I going off on a tangent or a rant of some kind or another.
No, not you, Eric.
And I got really excited, and sometimes my mouth works faster than my brain, oftentimes. And I said, Conrad, just Google the internet and look it up. And Conrad let me go on, and he's laughing, and I didn't realize that he was laughing at me, while I was ranting. And when I got done ranting and tried to catch my breath, he goes, Eric, did you just say Google the internet? As soon as he said that, I went, oh, I did say that. And I laughed at myself. 20 minutes later or so, there's a t-shirt being produced by Pro Wrestling Tees called Google the Internet. And I said to Conrad the next day, I said, how cool is it that I can step on my tongue and completely screw up, and it's going to be a t-shirt within 24 hours. Now that's a loyal, passionate audience, but it's just another example of, when people are really into what you're doing, you can actually make a mistake and it turns out to be kind of fun. And that's a perfect example. I honestly just look at it as fun. To me, I look forward to, I'm doing a podcast with Conrad either later today or probably early tomorrow morning. And I'm already looking forward to doing it. And I just spent 2 days with him in Huntsville. I just got home yesterday, but I'm already looking forward to it.
How much does it mean to you, to the fact that people still care? Because like you said, you were unsure. You didn't think people would care. But how much does that mean to you, the fact that after all these years, 30 plus years in the business, fans still care very passionately about you?
I can't even articulate it, really. I can't do a good job with that one because it's overwhelming in a way. It's obviously, the right words, aren't going to come out right now, but I'm super grateful. I mean, really, really grateful. Because I'm still, even though I'm not in the business, I'm still kind of connected to it. Yeah. I still get to have fun with it. I still get to, I get to go to AEW every once in a while and hang out with people that I used to work with 25 and 30 years ago. I get to go, I was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, for crying out loud, and all the good things that, that came with that, and it's still coming with that. So for me at this stage of my career, at my age, I'm 65 years old, I'll be 66 next month, to still be even active on the periphery the way I am, on the outside, but still kind of with a toe in the water occasionally. I mean, how does it get better than that? Really? Just to me, it doesn't. Not for me.
How much longer do you want to do everything?
I don't ever see stopping. I am not, I have to be busy. I have to be challenged. Um, I have to be active. I hear people talk or I see TV commercials. You want to plan your retirement, and they show some guys, sailing around on a boat or playing golf or whatever. I'm thinking, yeah, that'd be fun for about a week. And then I'd be beating myself over the head with a golf club or somebody else. It would drive me crazy. I've had enough downtime over the last few years to know that I don't want any more downtime. So if it's, if the day comes and the podcast really isn't, clicking anymore, something else will be. Yeah. I'll find that other lightning bolt. I'll always be busy in that respect.
Something, because I'm actually off today, and I have booked an interview with you. Was able to interview Damian Priest today, and my wife's like, "You're off today. This is your first day off in 9 days." And I'm like, "Well, this really isn't work. I don't feel like talking to pro wrestlers, two people in the wrestling business. I really don't feel like it's work. When it feels like to me when it's work, that's when like you just said, that maybe you should be doing something else."
It's funny you said that. You've got great insight.
And I try.
When Conrad and I tape our shows, in the beginning, we would tape them because Conrad's schedule's especially then, was a lot more challenging than mine was. So I was trying to accommodate Conrad's schedule. Whatever he wanted to do, I would do. Well, Conrad was, we would often do the shows during the week, during the day. And that's okay. I can do it. But I told Conrad about a year and a half ago, I said, man, if Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings are my best time, my weekends is what I save my fun stuff for. During the week is what I have to do for a job. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons I have so much fun doing the podcast and looking forward to it is because that's my time off. That's when I do the things that I like to do and have fun doing. And I still have fun doing the other things I do during the week too, but it's different. This is, when you listen to our show, hopefully at least it comes across like two buddies, having a beer talking about wrestling, as opposed to, something you see on Discovery Channel. Yeah. It's not a documentary style. It's like, let's just shoot the shit and have fun with it and make each other laugh and make the audience laugh. And occasionally I like to piss the audience off still, because it's in my nature, but I try to do it in a fun way. But it's a blast. And I think part of the reason is I keep it a blast by doing it on my off days. I try not to do these types of things. Now, today's different because it was you. It's a little different. Typically, I don't do these kinds of things on a weekday. I try to save them all for the weekends for that very reason. And I've got 3 of them scheduled this weekend when, most people would be out trying to play golf or doing whatever they do for hobbies. I'd rather do a podcast.
No, and I greatly appreciate it. It really does mean a lot, Eric. I know your schedule's been extremely busy, and I'll keep it short. And about the whole network, it seems like Conrad's got like a podcast empire, and the big announcement with Jeff Jarrett the other day, and you're laughing because I think we're both in agreement there. And what do you make of the addition of Jeff Jarrett to ad-free shows and also to the Westwood One team?
Well, I'll talk about Jeff. I think Jeff's podcast has the potential of being one of the more successful podcasts on the Conrad Thompson Podcast Network.
We can tell him
that. And I say that because, look, it's all about stories and the passion you have to tell those stories. Jeff Jarrett grew up in the business.
Yeah.
Jeff Jarrett grew up in a household where some of the biggest names in the history of the business came through and spent time. Jeff Jarrett, as a kid, had a perspective that very few people that do podcasts have. And he's experienced things that very few people that do podcasts have experienced. He's a great storyteller, and he's got a wealth of stories to tell, and he's not afraid to laugh at himself. And that's the key. It goes back to being fun. Yeah. There are some people that have a wealth of experience and knowledge and information, but they keep it inside because they're just a little tight. Yeah. And they're a little afraid to make fun of themselves or have fun with themselves, might be a better way to say that. and that's okay, but certain people, I mean, not to make it about me, but I think one of the things that Jeff and I have in common is that we're both mature enough and comfortable enough in our own skins to look back and go, wow, that was really stupid. Yeah, I did that. Kabam, and when you get to that point and you can look back at things and tell stories and listen to people who have comments about some of the things you've done and just be okay with it and not get defensive about it, that's when the magic happens. And I think that's going to happen with Jeff. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. I've known Jeff for a long time, and Jeff has really evolved and grown as a human being. He's a different cat today than he was 20 years ago. I think it's going to be a really special show. I really do. And I'm not just saying that because he's a part of our team. I really, really believe that. Now, as far as Conrad goes, I told him when I found out about Jeff, and I found out about Jeff, months ago.
Yeah.
This has been in the works for a while. But when I got the news, I said, Conrad, one more. If you do one more, the entire podcast team is going to do an intervention.
I told him that like 6 months ago because we had talked and he had said something about, he had always wanted something with Jeff and something with Heyman. And I'm like, you're going to run out of time. You guys are going to get mad at you. I'm like, Eric's going to be upset at Tony, JR, and then, Bruce. And I'm like, then your wife's going to get pretty mad at you. I'm like, you're already busy enough. I'm like, everyone's going to do an intervention with you and you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
No, I mean, there's no reason why I'd be mad. I can't speak for anybody else, but to me, it's the more the more the merrier. It's one of the reasons you mentioned adfreeshows.com. And for your listeners that don't know what that is, it's a platform where, you can go and, for a couple bucks a month, you can listen to everybody's podcast without any commercials. Some people like to do that, or you can have access to some amazing content.
Yeah.
And that platform, adfreeshows.com on Patreon, is growing so quickly. We're the number one wrestling related platform on Patreon by a mile. Yeah. We're, I think, of the 200,000, shows on Patreon, we're like number 56 worldwide. It's kind of a big damn deal. And the only way you get there and sustain it and continue to grow is to add fresh content and fresh perspectives. And I'm a firm believer that when you can set yourself up in a situation where 1 + 1 = 3, or in this case, 6 + 1 = 9. That's a great strategy as long as you can pull it off. And I'm like everybody else. I'm going, Conrad, where are you going to find the time? Because it's not just the time he spends doing the podcast. He spends 2.5 hours every week with me. Probably the same with just about everybody else. Back when he was doing Bruce would go 3.5 hours sometimes. Yeah. Now he's going to do probably 2 hours with Jeff. So it's not just the hours it takes to do the podcast, it's the time it takes to prep for the podcast. You don't just turn on the mic and turn on your camera and go. You have to prep for that. You have to have a general direction of where you're going. And then for Conrad, he has to schedule his life around 6 other people or 7 other people. That's like herding fucking squirrels. That's tough to do. So, I'm a little concerned about that, but Conrad's a workhorse, man. He loves to work. He's a driven human being. He's built, an immensely successful mortgage industry or mortgage business. And he did that because he's got drive and ambition and he loves wrestling. And this was his dream come true. And now he's doing both. And the podcast network is actually feeding his mortgage business, with people that are friends of that are follow us on podcasts and they hear a commercial and they go check out his mortgage site. It's, it's really, it's just a great full circle.
Eric, what's coming up this week on the podcast?
Gosh, I'd have to look at my notes. I think we're doing something from 1996, Slamboree from 1996. I think. Don't hold me to it, but I think that's it. We actually had to shift gears a little bit because we had prepped to do a TNA episode and a lockdown, I think, from 2011.
Okay.
we were going to do that. We had prepped to do that. And then we called an audible because of travel this week. So now we're shifting. So I think it's Slamboree 1996.
Slamboree 96. The only thing I remember, I think it was Ric Flair and the Giant. I remember.
Oh boy. Can't
Hey,
wait.
you booked the match here.
I did indeed. I did indeed. Who booked that shit? Oh, it was me. Oh.
Do you ever look at that back sometimes and you're like, oh, what the fuck was I thinking?
All the time. All the time. I have to remind myself it was a different time, it was a different era, the audience was different, blah, 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 blah. But every once in a while, one stinks up the room so bad that, even watching it, I can still smell it. So yeah, it's bad.
Well, thankfully, social media wasn't around at that time.
No kidding, right? My life would have been horrible.
Where can the fans find the podcast, Eric, for the people on DAZN that, DAZN's really starting to get into wrestling a little bit, especially on creating videos for the YouTube channel. Where can people find the podcast?
Podcast is available. It's 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, and you can find it anywhere on any podcast platform. Just Google the internet and you'll find it.
Google that.
I'm gonna have fun with that for the rest of my life. I told Conrad the next, I said, only working with you can I keep making money doing things that people are never going to let me let down or forget. So, or live down, I should say. But yeah, anywhere you get your favorite podcast, adfreeshows.com will take you right over to our platform on Patreon. Twitter, it's @ebischoff, and that's pretty much it for me.
I'm going to see you on AEW again. I like when you get on AEW, Eric. You're always laying the smackdown to Jericho and MJF, so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's good chemistry there. I love working with those guys. I think MJF is amazing. He's such a good performer. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg with him. He's so good on the mic, and he's got such a great sense of what his character needs to be. That I love working with him. Always love working with Chris. Always love working with Chris. We just have great chemistry. We don't even have to talk much. Just have to give me a general idea of what he's doing and why he's doing it, and we just go out and do it. It's kind of like the same relationship or same chemistry I had with Steve Austin and Mick Foley, Roddy Piper to a degree. There were certain people you could just go out. You knew what you needed to do because you knew where the story was going, but then you just go out and do it and play off of each other and improv. It's so much fun. And Chris is one of the best to do that with.
You brought up talking about MJF and his promo skills. Do you think is the comparison people make to him and Piper in terms of promos, is that a fair assessment, or is that a little too rich yet for someone so young in the game?
Oh, this is going to get a ton of heat.
I'm not trying to generate heat, Eric.
No, I know you're not. I do it.
We both know how people get, though. People get riled up about stuff.
I do it by accident, but I do it nonetheless. In many respects, MJF is light years ahead of Roddy Piper. And I say that because MJF is very focused. There's never a sameness about his promos, but there was a consistency in his character. Mm-hmm. Roddy was great at going all over the place. Roddy was, you never knew what to expect from Roddy, and he would say some of the crazy stuff, and somehow he'd make it all make sense. And that was very entertaining. There was nobody better at that than Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
But in terms of just laser focused, heat seeking verbiage, I don't think there's anybody as good, nearly as good, or maybe ever as good is what I think MJF is going to be. If he's not there yet, and I don't think he is, I think he's still growing and evolving as a character. But from what I see now, the consistency in the way he approaches his promos is so laser focused and white hot heat that it's really entertaining for me to watch, because I love heel stuff. I mean, obviously, right? I love a good babyface promo too when they come along. But man, give me a good heel. It just melts the arena, and I'm about that.
It's amazing he's 24 and cutting those types of promos. It just blows my mind away.
That really pisses me off.
I thought you would have known how old he was, Eric. Come on.
I have shoes older than him. The truck I drive is older than him. This is bad. I think I've got a couple pairs of jeans that are older than him. This is crazy.
He's a fan. I'm going to tell him that I haven't talked to him in about a year, and I'm going to tell him that you said this about, because you look at him and it just seems like he's light years, and it's amazing. He's light years above everybody else, and he hasn't been in the business that long. He's not a 5, 10, 15-year veteran. He's only been in the game a couple of years, so it's what he's done in a short amount of time, to me, is quite amazing.
It is. And, you know, if you look at some of the big names, the guys that have really, really done well in the business, they've all been in the business 7, 8, 9, 10 years before they started getting real traction. It takes that long to find that character that really works for you. And it takes that long for the audience to sign off on you, because the audience in wrestling, as we talked about a little bit earlier, they're very, very loyal, but they're very discerning. You know, you've got to earn their respect. And it takes a while to learn how to do that. And the audience won't really respect you until you've been in the business for a while. You got to pay your dues. Yeah. They don't think of it that way. The audience doesn't think of it that way, but it's true. And for a guy like MJF to come along with so little experience in so much talent, consistently great talent with so little experience, is an anomaly. He's definitely an anomaly.
We'll end with that, Eric. Every time we talk, we always say 45 and it ends up being a little bit longer. But Eric, I greatly appreciate time today, especially on a Friday. Like you said, you don't do a lot of podcasts during the week, and you also just got back from Orlando from one hell of a week. WWE Hall of Famer Eric Bischoff.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much.
All right. See ya.
All right, buddy. Take it easy.
Bye.